Welcome to today's presentation. I failed my 2024 ADP test. What can I do for 2025 with Steve Best? Before we get started, I would like to point out the question mark icon at the top of your GoToWebinar screen. This is where you're going to enter in any questions that you may have for Steve. Feel free to submit your questions at any time, but keep in mind that the Q&A portion will be held at the end. If time runs out and you still have questions, you can send them to our email address, webinars@novo401k.com. Right next to questions, you will see a paper icon. This is where you will find today's handouts in PDF form. If you are unable to view or click on the handout, you can send us an email and we can provide that for you. If you are with us today to earn continued education credits, please be sure to stay until the very end. There will be a pop-up survey. Make sure that you read through carefully with the questions if you are needing a certificate. This is going to allow us to track your time and participation. Certificates will be sent out within a week for those who have met the time requirements. To view any webinars you may have missed and the recording of this session, you can always follow us on our YouTube channel, which is Nova 401k Associates, or visit our website, which is www.nova401k.com/webinars. Thank you so much for joining us. I would now like to introduce today's presenter, Nova's VP and shareholder, Steve Best.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. This is about failed ADP testing, and we'll talk about what that is in just a moment. Quick disclaimer that all this information is not meant to substitute for legal or tax advice, and if you need that kind of advice, please consult an attorney or accountant as needed. We'll go through a little introduction at first of what the average referral percentage test is. We'll talk about how to solve some of these testing problems, a little bit about different plan designs, safe harbor plan designs, and also some additional optional testing that we offer that might give you more insight into how you're doing in a particular year to know if you're going to be failing the test or passing the test based on current year data, and then what kind of plan amendments and other testing elections might be available in your actual plan document to help mitigate or prevent testing failures. First, we want to understand, what is the ADP test and how are the refunds that result from that kind of a failed test applied? What options do you have in terms of how to minimize the refunds? And again, talk about some of the different plan designs that can basically exempt you from this testing altogether. And again, all of you, that were sent invites to this webinar had testing issues where failures were involved. So first, we want to go over again, a little chart of some of the roles and responsibilities, like who's doing what in this arrangement. And in any 401k plan arrangement, there are 4 distinct roles that have to be played by somebody. Obviously, there's your firm, the plan sponsor. You decide you want to have a 401k plan, and you have certain responsibilities, which include the overall fiduciary responsibility for the plan, meaning that you're generally having to sign off on the forms that we have to file with the government, forms when refunds have to be processed require your signature and so forth. One of your primary obligations also is to offer or let your employees participate in the plan in a timely manner. And then when those deductions come out of your payroll system, to send them over to whoever your investment provider is in a timely manner, which is usually 3 to 5 business days. And that brings us to the investment provider themselves. So that company, and we deal with quite a few different partner firms from John Hancock, Voya, Principal, Empower. So you may each have a different investment provider, but that provider is the one that has the access to the investments, the mutual funds. They keep track of all the money that's in every participant's accounts. They also provide the internet access and the ability to move funds between the investments, and then also process distributions when people terminate employment or they need a loan or a hardship distribution, that sort of thing. So they're the money processors, if you will. Then there has to be a company that handles the compliance work. 401k plans are heavily regulated by the Department of Labor and the IRS, and they have to follow quite a few rules, some of which we'll talk about today. And that's where our firm comes in. We're a third-party administration firm that helps you, keep out of trouble with the IRS and DOL, and make sure you conform to all the required rules, which included some of this testing we're going to talk about today. We prepare the annual 5500 filing that goes to the Department of Labor. We maintain your legal plan document that has to be updated from time to time. And then the final piece of the puzzle is your financial advisor. Neither our firm nor the investment provider themselves can actually provide specific investment advice to your participants. And so your financial advisor is licensed to do that and can help with enrollment meetings, helping your participants maybe select specific investments they should be in if they have questions about that. And so together, it's kind of a team approach to managing your 401k plan. So we talked about this again. 401k plans are highly regulated by the IRS and the Department of Labor, and they get preferential tax treatment. And so they're, for that reason, since they're giving tax breaks to both the employees and the companies, whenever your company makes an employer contribution, you get to deduct that off your employer tax return. You do have to follow quite a few rules, and they're meant to protect all the employees that are in the plan. So our firm and all 401k plans are required to pass a series of non-discrimination tests every year. And the list in the box here to the right are just some of the tests. We're only going to be talking really about the ADP test and the ACP test, but there are other tests that measure one form of discrimination or not. And usually, again, all this discrimination that we're talking about is to prevent the highly paid employees that are participating in the plan from benefiting disproportionately more than the non-highly paid people in the plan. So that, when we're talking about what kind of discrimination are we talking about, it's between the highly paids and the non-highly paids. So we'll have some terminology in this presentation. An HCE is meant to refer to a highly compensated employee, and HCEs are the non-highly compensated employees. ADP actually stands for Average Deferral Percentage Test, and we'll be going through exactly what that is. If you see the term QNEC, that refers to Qualified Non-Elective Employer Contribution. So a common question we get from plan sponsors and also highly compensated employees when they get these refunds is they don't understand why they're being limited and getting money back, because they can clearly go out on the internet and the web to see that the maximum contribution limit for 2025 is actually $23,500, right? That's the most that an employee can put in of their own money. So they always get confused about, well, why can't they get to that limit in this 401k plan? So the reason is there is a participation test, and that's what the average deferral percentage test is. But it's a participation test that ensures that the plan doesn't discriminate in favor of the highly compensated employees with regard to the employee contribution rates. Okay, and if those rates get out of whack, we'll look at some examples here of what I'm talking about. But when the highly paid people are contributing disproportionately more to the plan than the non-highly paid employees, then we have a failing situation that has to be corrected in some way. And there's a variety of ways that it can be fixed, but the most common one is to refund money back to the highly paid people until they get within a very specified limit prescribed by the IRS in these tests. Okay. Additionally, if there is the ability to have the employer make additional contributions to the plan, which are these QNECs we were talking about. But even though it's an employer contribution, we can count the employer contribution as an employee contributions for purposes of the ADP test and help it pass. So it's a way to, even though you had maybe low participation in your plan from your non-Hileys, we can give them an employer contribution and treat it as an employee contribution, and therefore it looks like it increases the participation in the plan from the non-Hileys, right? Or you can do some combination of the two, refunds or QNEs. So let's go through actually the mechanics of the ADP test so you understand what's going on in case you get questions from your HCEs. Also, again, we'll go through a lot of material here. If you don't remember exactly how this works, a few months from now, you can always call your Nova account manager to go through the details again. They can explain it to either you so you can relay it to your HCEs or talk to them personally, right? But we have a number of steps, and the first one is to determine which employees are in the test. So who is in this test? It's every eligible employee who's eligible to contribute. So it's not just the people that are deferring out of their pay and contributing to the plan. It's everybody that's eligible, including the people who are just choose not to contribute. All right. So again, this includes your anybody that's eligible at any time during the year. So your actively employed people at the end of the year, anybody that terminated during the year that happened to be eligible are also included. So think about it like your entire eligible payroll register for the year. That's who we have to include in this test. So the second step is to divide the company into two groups, a highly compensated employee group and a non-highly compensated employee group. Okay, so what is a highly compensated employee? Highly compensated employees for 2025 are any employees who meet one of the following criteria. If the employee made more than $155,000 in the preceding year, 2024, they're a highly compensated employee for 2025. And the IRS does it this way because they want you as a plan sponsor to know who your HCEs are going into a year, right? So they base the threshold for compensation on the prior year. Now, this is not salary. This is what they actually earned during the year, including bonuses and all types of other pay that you might pay them. Their total gross pay. Even if your plan excludes certain compensation types of pay, like let's say your plan document for allocation purposes, what you're going to allocate on an employer basis might exclude bonuses. By definition, when you're figuring out who your Hileys are, you look at the gross pay number that's just required by law. Okay, so the top line number. Also, no matter what they make, any greater than 5% owner of the company is an HCE. All right, so you could have an owner, a greater than 5% owner pulling $50,000 a year. They're also highly compensated. And certain members of that owner, that direct owner, are also highly compensated. Now, again, these are people that are working at the company, right? Like if you had an owner who's not even working at the company, they're just a passive investor, obviously they're not in this test. So these are people working at the company, including the family members. So if you got children working there or parents that are related to the direct owner, they're highly paid as well. Okay. Everyone else is a non-highly compensated employee. And, again, we're using certain years here in this slide, but that's because the compensation threshold is 155, does tend to go up each year. So it's a little bit different. Sometimes they keep it the same based on inflation, and by they I mean the IRS. But it does tend to change from year to year, and generally it's been going up each year. So the third step is to calculate the percent of compensation that each employee contributes. So for example, right, if we just take one individual, John, who contributes 10,600 in pre-tax deferrals, they put 5,000 in Roth, which is an after-tax deferral for last year, and they made 130,000. You add together both the pre-tax and the Roth to determine what the complete employee contribution is, divided by the comp, and we come up with 12%. So that's that person's individual contribution rate. So step 4 is now to average. We have to get the average for each of these groups, right? We got a highly compensated group and non-highly compensated group. We now have to come up with what is the average contribution rate for each group. So numerically, it looks like this. If I had a company and I only have 2 highly compensated employees and one is putting in 12% and the other puts in 0, the average is 6, right? So you just take the total deferral percentage of 12 and you divide by 2, right? That's how averages work. Similarly, your non-highly compensated average in this case would be 3% with only 2 non-highlies. And this assumes that this is everyone that's eligible, so a very small plan. Finally, we have to compare the averages for each group, right? So generally, there can only be a 2 percentage point spread between the averages of the 2 groups. They give you a little bit of a break or a little bit of a boost if your non-highly compensated average is under 2%. You get to multiply by 2, and if it's 2% or more, then you add 2 percentage points. So that sets a maximum deferral, passing deferral rate for your highlies. So you can see over here if your non-highlies are only averaging 3%, the maximum percentage that your highly paid people can put in on average is 5%. So you take the 3 plus 2, we get 5. So again, this is just the example I just gave. We've got 3% average, then 5% for the highlies is going to be the maximum. Okay. Finally, if we do have a failure, right? So when I say the percentages were out of whack, now we're above that 2 percentage point spread on the highly compensated group. We have to cure or correct any testing failures. As we talked about before, there are a variety of ways to do it. The most common one is to reduce the contribution rates of the highly compensated group by refunding some of the money back, right, until we get back within this 2 percentage point spread. Now, another way to solve the problem might be to put a plan limit in place. I'll give you some examples of what that is, but within your plan document, you could actually set a plan limit that the highlies have to stick to. So even though again, they can put in the 23.5 as a maximum, if you wanted to say all highly compensated employees are limited to 7%, and that's it, in the legal plan document that governs the plan, you can do that, and then that'll tend to mitigate some of the failures, right? But obviously the other way is, right, I mean, why are we failing? Because the highlies are participating at a much higher rate than the non-highlies. So one of the strategies would be to try and increase the participation rates of your non-highly compensated employees, right? And we'll go through, again, how to do some of that. But I mean, the whole idea is to get them interested in the plan, maybe have more enrollment meetings, educational meetings to try and tell them about the benefits of participating in a 401k plan for retirement, right? Again, we can also make an employer QNet contribution to the plan and count it as an employee contribution to boost the participation rate of those non-highly paid people. Or we could elect to become a safe harbor plan And I'll talk about that here in a moment, about what those types of plans are. But it is a particular contribution election that you have to make to the plan. So when we have to cure through refunds, which again is the most common, like 95% of all plans that fail ADP testing, cure the problem by refunding money back to the Hileys. All right. So those refunds are always taxable in the year the refund is made. We get questions sometimes like, if you, obviously we're doing this testing after the year closes. So we did all your 24 ADP testing in 2025, and we get the question, do people have to go back and refile their taxes if they happen to have filed their tax return early? And the answer is no, because the refund is taxable in the year it's actually refunded, which this year would have been 2025. There are certain deadlines to make the refunds without penalty. So long as we refund within 2.5 months after the plan year end, then there's no penalty to the company or the individual, right? Um, most plans are calendar year plans, so March 15th is the 2.5 month deadline. That's why you get a lot of reminder messages about us needing the data to do this testing if you're a tested plan within the first 2.5 months of this year. And I know they're annoying, but the reason we send so many reminders and follow-ups is that we don't want you to pay a 10% excise tax if the refunds are made after the 2.5 months. So if we miss that 3/15 deadline, then and I say you as a company, not the individual, has to pay a 10% excise tax on the late refund. And we want to avoid that to the greatest extent possible. Now, the refunds go to the Hileys who contributed the most. I'll show you some examples of that. Like, we get questions about, well, how does the refund process work? Who gets them, right? So we'll go through some examples. And just to keep in mind that, we can adjust some of the refunds for catch-up contributions, or can sort of retain them instead of refunding money. If people have not used up their entire catch-up limit, then we can call that refund a catch-up and retain it in the plan rather than refunding it to the individual. I'll go through some examples. So who gets the refunds? It's a 2-step process. The first step is there's an initial calculation based on the percentage that each Hiley contributed. So and again, I'll show you some numerical examples. The step 2 is that the refunds actually end up going back to the Hileys who contributed the highest dollar amount, not the highest percentage. So if we look at some numerical examples, we have John, who is making a lot more comp than Steve and David, right? But they're all highly compensated. The refunds initially of $6,500 in this example are computed based on what Steve and David contributed because they contributed the highest percentage, right? They're at 10% and 12% respectively. But what happens is the second step allocates all of the 6,500 back to John, who contributed the highest dollar amount, right? So again, how this is done is just mandated by law. So, the IRS, what is fair? What is a fair way to do it, right? I think the IRS's thinking here is that because John benefited the most out of the plan, right? They contributed the most money to the plan, even though they didn't have the highest percent of pay. I think their thinking is it's more fair to refund all the money back to John, even though he didn't cause the failure. The other two did, right? And that's debatable on what people think is really fair, but that's how the IRS is thinking about it. Now, because of that, there's a way, if you think that No, I think that the people that contributed the highest percentage should pay the price, so to speak. You can put a formal plan HCE limit in your document. So this would apply only to the highly compensated employees, and you're just going to put in your plan document that you know the HCEs are limited to, let's say, 7%, right? It could be any percent, but generally based on how your plan is doing in terms of the failure, you can slide that percentage around, make it higher or lower. Um, but again, the whole concept here is that your lower paid, highly compensated employees who are putting in a lot of money are deferring at a very high percent of pay. Like, in the second bullet, we've got somebody making 150 putting in 23,000. They're at 15% of pay, whereas, the people that are making up to the compensation limit of 350,000, they're putting in somewhere around 6% of pay, right? Um, so this individual is going to dramatically raise your average, right? I mean, those high percentages boost the average and cause the failure. The plan limits can be put in place to basically, hold these lower paid, highly compensated employees that are contributing a lot down, down to the 7% limit. So this results in some good possible treatment of catch-ups. The idea here, again, the catch-up limit, and we'll go through, what those are, but, people at a certain age, 50 years old, and now there's some new catch-ups for people that are between 60 and 63, but they can put in extra, right? And the key idea here is the catch-ups are not actually counted in the ADP test. So they don't count negatively against you. All right, so again, we'll go through what some of those limits are, but somebody that's age 50 and in this year can put in an extra $7,500, for example. And if we can treat that as a catch-up, or they contributed a catch-up, none of those are in the ADP test. And so putting in plan limits gives you more predictable results, right? And smaller passes, smaller failures. So when we talk about this catch-up treatment, what are we talking about? So if I put in a 7% HCE limit in this example, right, you can see John is not contributing a lot. They're all putting in the 75. They're actually not putting in $7,500 catch-up yet, but what John is doing is his total deferral is $30,500, right? And so his catch-up is 7,500. Catch-ups are created anytime, a testing failure occurs, or if you have a plan limit in your plan, right, that is exceeded, you can sort of convert the part of the contribution and call it a catch-up, right? So what's happening here for Steve and David is, because let's say they put in the full 18,700 over here, right? So this plan's failing normally if you didn't have a 7% limit. If they happen to put in the 18.7 here, and you have a 7% limit, basically what you can do is take part of this 18.7 and call it a catch-up, because that your plan limit has been exceeded, right? So the money doesn't actually get refunded. It just sort of slides into the catch-up bucket. It's not counted in your testing anymore. And so the percentages end up looking like this column instead of this one, right? And you can see how much that brought the average down. So it's just a way, putting a plan limit in, if you want, is a way to manage your testing to where you have, again, either a pass or just smaller failures. So QNECs are another method. You can put in additional contributions as an employer and count them as employee contributions. You're only able to use a certain testing method on a current year basis for doing this, but the downside is you can put in more money aside from the cost, The downside is if you make a QNet contribution to help pass testing, again, to your non-highly paid people, the money that goes in is 100% vested immediately. So if your plan had a vesting schedule on employer contributions, that vesting schedule doesn't apply to this type of a contribution. So a lot of times employers don't like the idea, number one, of having to pay more money into the plan to the non-highlies, and then also that it's 100% vested immediately, which means if somebody terminates next year or next month after you make the contribution, they can take all of it with them, right? None of it reverts based on the vesting schedule. So the other thing we can try to do is hold more educational meetings, you need to find some way to increase participation, right? This is a participation test, so we're either trying to reduce the Highleys participation rate to a passing level or somehow increase the non-Highly participation rate. So the more education you can do with your folks, and this is where your investment advisors can come in with the investment company representatives and hold more meetings about the benefits of participating in a 401k plan. You could also try to amend your plan to increase or restructure your matching contribution, and I'll go through what that looks like here in a moment. You could consider automatic enrollment. So automatic enrollment is a plan feature that you can have in your plan that automatically defaults any employee who does not make an affirmative election to contribute to the plan, which could include zero, but if they don't make a choice to contribute, then you can default them in at a certain rate, 2, 3, 4, 10%, whatever you put in your plan document. And again, what does this do, right? Because our non-highly paid group includes all the contributors and the zero contributors, you're eliminating zeros. The more a zero in an average brings the average way down. So if I can eliminate some of those zeros by defaulting them into the plan, meaning that, again, if you said, I've got an automatic enrollment feature that defaults somebody in at 3%, if they don't make an election, you automatically start deducting 3% from their pay and sending it into the plan on their behalf. They can opt out at any time they want, but we found that a lot of people that get automatically enrolled like that don't opt out at all. So it's a way to increase participation in the non-highly group. You can also have the automatic enrollment provisions have automatic step-ups or increases. So if your initial rate is 3% and you want, on the 12-month anniversary date of the automatic enrollment for that person, it goes up by 1% every year for 5 years, you could do that. So these are optional plan provisions you can add to your plan document. So what do I mean by restructuring your matching formula? Right. Plans, again, this is generally a discretionary formula, and plans have all types, right? As an employer, you can choose what formula you want to have. And in an example like this, if you have 100% or a dollar for dollar formula on the first 3% that an employee puts into the plan, that's essentially the same formula from a cost perspective as a 50% formula on the first 6, right? But the difference is the second formula, the 50% on the first 6, is motivating employees to put in 6% instead of 3, right? Like if an employee knows, I only have to put in 3% to get the full match, then that's probably what they'll do, right? But in the second formula, if they know, I've got to go all the way up to 6 to get the full match from the company, then they're more likely to do that. And again, this is going to increase the participation rate, right? Because you'll have more people putting in at 6 than 3, so your average goes up. So think about structuring your formulas to entice your non-highlies to put in more into the plan. Now, what about safe harbor plans? this is a specific type of plan design in the legal document where you make an election to either be a safe harbor matching plan or a safe harbor non-elective plan. And what if you meet the requirements of either of those, you get an automatic pass on your ADP test. All right. So if you're willing to commit to being one of these types of plans, then the Highleys can, it doesn't matter what the participation rate is from the non-Highleys. The Highleys can now max out at that 23,500 and you're home free. But it does come with certain costs, right? So what do I have to do to be a matching safe harbor? So again, a match is what it sounds like, right? I'm going to only contribute to individuals in the plan who are contributing themselves, right? So, but I have to have a specific formula to comply with the safe harbor rules. And that formula is dollar for dollar on the first 3%, and then 50 cents on the dollar on the next 2% that all employees contribute. All right. So again, it's only going to the contributors. Now, the other style of safe harbor that also meets the requirement is what we call a safe harbor non-elective. And in this example, it's got to be a minimum of 3%, and that 3% employer contribution goes to everyone who's eligible, whether or not they contribute or not. So if you've got a 3-month wait in your plan, right, for initial eligibility, when you get to the end of the year, anybody that fulfilled 3 months of service gets the 3%. And it doesn't matter whether they terminated in between or before the end of the plan year. If they were eligible in that plan year, you give them 3% of their eligible comp. All right. The other downside to being a safe harbor plan or cost is that these contributions are also 100% vested immediately when they go in. All right. You also have to commit to this election, to this formula for at least 1 year. If you get out of it, you can get out of it in the middle of a year, but then you revert back to testing, and you don't get that money back that you put in either. So the commitment is for at least 1 year, but you can generally change either the style of safe harbor formula from year to year. You just have to do it before the year starts. All right. Let's see. The third type of safe harbor plan is a combination of automatic enrollment and safe harbor. So it has a slightly different formula, but what we call a QACA, or a qualified automatic contribution arrangement, is an automatic enrollment plan, and it has certain rules you have to follow. But the formula in that plan is a little cheaper than the regular safe harbor match. So if we did the math on the regular safe harbor, right, which is 100% of the first 3 and then 50% of the next 2, anybody that puts in at least 5% in the first formula is going to get a 4% match. That's the cap, right? For a QACA style, you do 100% of the first 1% and then 50% of the next 5. And if you do the math on that, it's going to cap out at 3.5%. All right. The other advantage is that you get to attach a vesting schedule to the safe harbor contributions, which is not available in the regular safe harbor types of contributions. So the safe harbor plan designs without, it's 100% vested immediately. Here you can do 100% vesting, but after year 2. So if you have a high turnover company, people are coming and going within 2 years, then they would be actually 0% vested, and the company would recoup part of this contribution that you're making. So that's an advantage to this style. So what do you have to do if you want to make an election to be a safe harbor plan? Generally, it has to be prospective, right? Like, although some of the rules on that have changed, we'll go through that in the next couple of slides. But Nova would need to be contacted because this type of election requires an amendment to your plan documents. All right. And we need to have time to put that amendment in place, send out all the required notices that there are quite a few. So by November of this year, we need to know that, hey, I want to be a safe harbor plan for 2026. All right. So there are a couple of different deadlines. If you're, let me go back one. So for a matching plan, you can only do it on a prospective basis, right? There's no changing to a matching safe harbor in the middle of a year. And so we're in 2025. The best you can do if you want that type of election is that we make it effective for 2026. The 3% non-elective can now be done retroactively. This used to not be the case, but it is now. So you can either say, I want to be safe harbor non-elective retroactive to 1/1/2025. Again, we do need to amend by November, right? And you'll have to make the 3% contribution based on full 2025 compensation. We have some clients that get confused. It's like, well, I made the choice in November. I only give them 3% from November and December based on what they made in those 2 months. And it's like, no, it's retro all the way to back to the beginning of the year. And anybody that was eligible is going to get 3% of their full 2025 comp. Now you can actually be retroactive. You can make a retroactive safe harbor election all the way back to 2024. So we're in 25. The IRS will allow you to become a safe harbor retro to the prior year. So let's say, in the first 2.5 months of this year, you were failing badly, right? And the refunds were going to be tremendous, or your Highleys are very upset about the situation, and you're willing to be a safe harbor plan for that prior year. We could have done that, but the cost there now jumps to 4% pay. So just something to keep in mind when we get to January, February of 2026, and we're looking back at the 25 testing. If you have some bad failures and you want to go retro non-elective safe harbor and not have to refund anything, you can do it. There's just a cost to it. So what about automatic enrollment, right? Is it time maybe, because if you think about, forget the safe harbor version of automatic enrollment, you can just add automatic enrollment as an election to your plan without being safe harbor, right? And again, automatic enrollment, since I'm defaulting people into the plan and getting rid of some of those zeros, that's a way to increase your participation rate in your non-highly compensated employee group, right? And again, if they don't make an affirmative election to contribute once they're eligible, then you can default them into the plan at a particular rate that you select, right? And again, this improves participation in the plan for testing purposes. It also helps your employees save for retirement. The government now is so fond of the automatic enrollment concept that they, if for any new plan that was effective after 12/29 of 2022, if you were a startup new plan, you have to have an automatic enrollment provision by mandate for your 2025 plan years on into the future. It's not even a choice anymore. So only the plans that were in effect prior to 12/20/29 of 22 were grandfathered in. So they don't have to have automatic enrollment if they didn't have it, right? But if you're brand new, you actually have to have it now. It's not even a choice. Again, if you want to add automatic enrollment or any of these types of items, we do need an amendment to the plan. We also offer, this is a mid-year testing is an optional test that NOVA can perform, based on, in the middle of this year, around like June, July, you're going to get some emails from us about doing some mid-year testing. And it does say in there that it is optional. We just remember it is optional, and there is an additional cost for it. But what this allows you to do is you give us 6 months worth of your actual data for the first half of this year, for example. We'll extrapolate it out to an annual amount and run this test on sort of a mock basis to determine, does it look like you're going to fail or pass pretty easily for this year that you're in, right? What that enables you to do is at least be able to go to your highly compensated employees and let them know, hey, it looks like we're going to fail again. I mean, if they want to cut back the highlies, if they want to voluntarily reduce their rates, they can do that. But it's just a way to inform them of, what might be coming up so that it's not a shock to them when they do get a refund, right? It also enables us to, put a few extra plan provisions in that might help pass the testing. So without going into details, there are different testing methods we can use, but we can only change to these methods before the testing year ends. So that's why mid-year testing, we'll run it a couple of different ways when we do your mid-year test. And if there's an advantage to one or the other, we'll let you know so we can amend your plan to that method. The problem is we can't run the test and change to that method after the testing year is closed. So we're in 25. There's no way to help you by amending your plan once we get into 2026, right? So the formal HCE limits, if you like that idea, we need to amend your plan. So contact your NOVA account manager. There are other testing methods like the top paid group election. So when we were talking about who's a highly compensated employee, and it's based on what people made in 2024. So, right, if you made 155,000 or more in 24, you're highly paid. Now, if you have a company where, let's say, half the population is making more than 155, right? We can put in an election that limits, so half my company, 50% is above the limit. I can further limit it to 20%. That can help, right? So it's called a top paid group election. That requires an amendment as well. So this generally doesn't apply to most companies because most companies don't have half of their people making above the limit. But if you know you're a company that is like that, like literally half my eligible group is making more than 155, contact us, because if your plan doesn't have this election in it, this could help you pass testing. All right. Or you can make this a safe harbor election that requires an amendment as well. So this is not really a testing issue, but just something that you should keep in mind for 2025, right? You want to have your payroll updated to the new maximum employee contribution limits. And there's a new one here that you may not be aware of that you should keep in mind, right? So anyone in 2025 who is under the age of 50 at any time during that year, right, is limited to 23,500. Anybody that turns 50 or is older than 50 at any time during 2025, right, is limited to 31,000. There's a new limit, part of the Secure 2.0 Act, for a special age range. Anyone that's 60 to 63 is has a higher limit than anyone, 34,750. And that's brand new for this year. I would contact your payroll companies to find out if they've accounted for that additional limit for those individuals. So that's a new one you may not have heard about yet. Again, we always check for these limits in case somebody goes over them when we do your testing, but it's better to have them incorporated into your payroll as well, right? So also there's a maximum compensation limit. So no matter how much money a highly paid person might make, for plan purposes, we can only count $350,000 in 2025. So you can make $1 million as an owner or whoever. But for plan purposes, meaning what I base my matching contribution allocations on, my profit sharing, all of that, 350 is it. Okay. So why do I mention that? In your payroll system, if you're making an employer matching contribution, right, on a payroll by payroll basis, you need to cut people off based on your formula and this limit, right? So if we do the math, if you have a 4% maximum formula, 100% up to 4, right? 4% of 350 is $14,000. In your payroll system, you should have it in there that the match cuts off when somebody hits $14,000 in match. If your formula was 50% up to 6, that caps out at 3%, right? So 3% of 350 is $10,500. In your payroll system, it should be capped. So cap people at the dollar amount. You don't cap them at when they earned their 350,000th dollar. That's not how it works. Just convert your matching formula into a dollar maximum, and they stop when they hit the dollar maximum, not when they hit the compensation limit. I don't know if we have any questions at this point, Yvette.
Nope, no questions came in, so we can go ahead and close out.
Okay.
Alrighty. One second. All right. So just a reminder to everybody that if you look at the top right-hand corner of your webinar screen, there is a little paper icon where you can download today's material in PDF form. If you are not able to download that, go ahead and shoot us an email and we will provide you with that handout. For anybody that is with us for continuing education credits, please be sure to stay till the end. There is going to be a pop-up survey for you to fill out. Please be sure that you read through the questions so that we make sure that if you are needing a certificate, we get that to you. Certificates will be sent out within a week for those who have met the time requirements. If you have any other questions, you can email us webinars@nova401k.com. To view any webinars you may have missed and the recording of this session, you can follow us on our YouTube channel, which is Nova 401k Associates. But thank you so much, Steve, and thank you everybody for joining us. We hope you have a great day. Bye.